let's paint some things that go bump in the night. Whoa. Hi everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to be doing our first paint tutorial, and I've chosen the Myrmourn NightHaunt Banshees as our first model. Now these ladies come from the Age of Sigmar range. They're spectral, they're creepy, they are a true scary sisters when in battle. So let's get painting. So here we go then, we're going to hit the model with some Style Res black primer, which is made by Badger. You'll notice that the model already had a white coating over it from a previous priming session, mainly because I didn't know what I was going to do with the model. But a nice solid black covering will give us a good base for our base colours. Now for our zenithal highlight, we're going to use Artist's Acrylic Matte Medium and some Liquitex Titanium White with a little bit of airbrush thinner. And we're going to mix this down into an almost single cream consistency. The reason we use the matte medium is it just takes some of the sheen away from the Liquitex paint. So coming in at a 45-degree angle, we're going to use the airbrush to give us a lovely zenithal highlight, catching all the raised light areas, mapping out where our highlights will sit. And now for our basing colours, we're going to use Golden Phthalo Green, 100 Blue from scale 75 and Despair Green from scale 75. So we start off with a nice base coat of the phthalo green, avoiding some of the deeper recesses of course, and it just sits well on that zenithal highlight. And then in some of the deeper recesses we're going to add the 100 Blue, and then some of the Despair Green catching the higher areas, and this will give us a 3-colour transition with some real smoky blends, and it's really opening up our sort of deep NightHaunt look. Now we're just going to add Apothecary White from Citadel contrast range to the top of the cowl. The translucent nature of these paints lend themselves well to showing through the base colours. Now we've got scale 75 green skin flesh, which we mix with a little bit of thinner just to keep it down, and then we hit from a lower 45-degree angle some of those lower tones of the dress and underneath the spectral cowl, and also just to give some warmth. I really like this green, it's got some nice warmth to it. Now we move to scale 75 again, spring green, same idea, just going to put a bit of thinner in it for the airbrush, and again we're just going to layer this over the green skin flesh. And again it just gives a richer, warmer green with a bit more vibrancy. You can see how it's now picking out the lower cowl and robe, again creating more depth to the layers. Now my favourite colour, Liquitex Vivid Lime Green. This stuff's amazing, it's by far my favourite ink. I'm going to hit the bottom of the robe and it's going to look like it's a light and on green fire. Check this out, super bright, I love it. Look at that, happy with that. So now we want to add some definition to the edges of the cowl and the flat areas facing upright. So I'm going to use my Apothecary White again off of the wet palette with the brush just to pick up the raised areas. It will build on the original sprayed on airbrushed contrast paint and just strengthen the colour up a little bit more. If you want to make this deeper and it's a little bit more opaque, you can add some Utherian Grey to it, which I've got on the wet pad as well, just for the absolute top section. And we can use a bit more of the Utherian Grey again for a bit more of an edge highlight around the rim of the cowl. Just concentrating the light source from above. when the base of the robe is so vibrant, we want to make sure the top has also got strength rather than just a sprayed out diffused colour. So continue to strengthen up the colour on the top of the head, moving down to the edges, and you can see after a while it really does start to solidify and come together. This is about 4 coats now. Thin it down with water to just blend it into the green, as you can see there. You can spend ages doing this, but I think I'm pretty happy with how it is now. I'm gonna knock that on the head. Just finish now this annoying part. Contrast paints are great because you can use them in a variety of ways. I tend to use them more as a glaze, like I'm doing here, than a straight contrast paint. I just find it works better with the colours underneath. So now we're going to move to another colour, scale 75. This one is Goblin Flesh. It's a very bright colour, almost mimicking the lime green of the ink. But now we're going to do the same again, picking out the highlight areas and the raised areas. And the way I scale 75 paints dry is they really dry to a nice blended layer. I love them for layer use. You can see there it's really blending in nicely now, a little bit of wet blending. Put some on the front of the dress as well. Again, just picking out the very edges where the light would reflect from the ghost or geist. Love the smoky blends. And by laying that nice transition of the golden phthalo green to start with into those hues of the 100 blue, you've got this nice deep, rich, dark blend going into the green. Again, turning our attention to the back of the model, using a bit of water to just thin it down. Keep coming back. You can see on the wet palette how light the colour is. And again, just slowly catching all the edges, almost doing a kind of dry brush technique but with more paint on. So we're now going to use a glaze medium from Vallejo. I'm going to mix that on the wet pad with our Otheran Grey, which we've already used a little bit of with the contrast paint. And this is where we're really going to bolster up the edges now. Again, the glaze medium just thins it out slightly and makes it flow nicely. Good little trick for when you're edge highlighting using Citadel paints, which can be a little bit thick and a bit claggy and have a tendency to not leave the brush. When you put the glaze medium in, it helps. Ushabti Bone, another Citadel colour. Use this on the skull area, just that small jawbone area inside the cowl. Now we're going to look at the base. The base so far has just got the overspray from the airbrush, but I'm going to go back to contrast colours again. Space Wolves Grey and Militarum Green. Give them a really good shake, of course. I use agitators in mine. So we're just going to plaster Militarum Green all over the base. Getting it all the nooks and crannies, give it a complete covering. The point of this model is the base is there to show off the brightness and the vibrancy of the model, so we don't want to make it overly complicated. And while this is still wet, we then hit it with Space Wolves Grey, concentrating on the stone areas and the rocks and any darker gravel or skulls. But because both paints are still very wet, they'll start to merge and blend together, leaving a nice mottled effect. So now we're looking at AK Interactive True Metal. Now this is a nice metallic wax system, kind of resembling oil paints, but very thick. They polish up beautifully. You can put them on a model and then polish them with a dry cloth or a small lint pad, and they really go shiny. We're going to use gunmetal as a base, aluminium as a highlight, and gold for some of the edge garnish. Dot of white spirit just to thin them down, and we want to get these away from their waxy consistency into a thinner, almost creamier paint, a bit like that. Same with the silver, aluminium. Pop our gold in. I'm going to do the same in a sec. So now we're going to put gunmetal all over the ghost's armor, and we're going to use the gold in a second to just go over all the decorative parts. But for now, gunmetal as a base. So cover this corset, metal corset, in the gunmetal, and obviously the sword and any other metallic parts. Why I really like this paint is because it's workable. You can move it around afterwards using a little bit of white spirit. You can remove any mistakes, but also it does give a really deep metallic look to it because it has so many metallic particles in it. Gold has gone on the hilt now of the weapon, and obviously on the filigree around the base of the corset. So that will just dry now. That takes a little while to dry. So now we're going to Abtilung 502 black, which I thinned down hugely into a wash with white spirit. This is my secret weapon. And now our metallics have completely dried. This is about an hour and a half later. You can use a hairdryer to speed it up. We're just going to use the oil wash now to just sink into all the recesses of all the metallic areas. I love oil washes more than acrylic because they're so viscous. They just sit in all of the grooves and they run beautifully across the model without tainting the acrylic colours that we've already got in place. I'm going to pop a little bit in the fingers as well, just to give those some definition, and also a bit on the jaw and the bone. And on the base I'm going to pick out some of the deeper recesses with some spot shading around the vines and the cobblestones, up the gravestone, down the gravestone, and it just dries nicely without pooling mess everywhere and having to relayer. The good thing with oil, of course, is it stays wet for quite a long time, so you can go in with a cotton bud afterwards with some white spirit on it and just clean up any mistakes. So now once that's dried, again hairdryer can speed it up, we're just going to go with the aluminium wax and just pick out some of the raised silver areas, which will typically be on the corset and then the very tip of the sword. Now we're going back to our three green colours again, which is our green skin, flesh, spring green and goblin flesh, mixing them together on the wet palette. And now with the darker of the colour range, I'm going to pick out all of the ivy and vines that are on the base. And then touch the tops in certain places just lightly with a little bit of the spring green, just to give some vibrancy. Don't want to go too crazy with this, less is more. Remember, the base is there to show off the model, not to try and take over. I've also put a bit of Utheran grey on the skull tops as well. And now back with my lime green ink. This is the finishing touches. We're just going to give a light spray across the base of the model downwards onto the base. Now this may seem odd because you've just spent ages painting the base, but because the light source is from the ghost itself and she's glowing with spectral energy, I want that to be reflected on the ground. So a bit of one source lighting here, shooting downwards onto the ground. And that's it. I'm pretty happy with this model as it stands now. Nothing really else to do on it, apart from take a few photographs. So that was our NightHaunt Banshees. You can see by using slightly different, more artistic principles and moving away from the core heavy metal style of Games Workshop, it allows us to be a little bit more experimental with what we do with the paint on the miniature. By using this uniformity in colour with the rest of the NightHaunt army, the Banshees look menacing, yet different enough to have that real spectral glow about them. For our next video, we'll be doing a short mini make on a display diorama for the rest of our NightHaunt army. It's kind of gooey and eerie and a bit toxic, so I think you'll like it. Thanks for joining me again. Please do like the video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button for future updates. I'll see you next time. Look after yourself.